Was that the only other service they have at Aish, or they have other?
No. This is they have different services. They have three different services going on.
Ah, okay.
A young group for young professionals, for any service.
Okay. Okay. So, imuter l'malva laheyarot bifnei halova, we've done this already. She'ila halacha rovachat biyadenu, she'asur l'malva lingos v'lidchok et halova lifroa k'sheyodea she'en lo mima lahachzir. We already are familiar with this halacha that the creditor, the lender, is not allowed to appear or is not allowed to really put any pressure on a debtor to pay back his loan when he knows that he doesn't have the ability to pay. As the pasuk says, do not be an oppressor. And therefore, a lender violates this biblical law anytime he asks the debtor for money when he knows he doesn't have. Now the question is, can he just pass in front of the borrower, just as a reminder that he should pay it back? Or will we say that just to appear before him, it's usher? Let's say a guy owes me money, and I'm all the way on the other side of the base medrash. So I go over to his table and I said, I didn't want you to be alone. Right. Okay. Or something like that. Right. So tshuva, so when the time of repayment arrives, and the lender knows that the lova does not have the ability to pay back, even to appear before him, if it's deliberate, would not be permitted. Because when he sees the lender and he doesn't have the ability to pay, he'll be embarrassed. Because this guy knows that I owe him the money and I'm humiliated. The only thing you are allowed to do is if you feel the guy may have forgotten that he borrowed the money, you are allowed to let him know. I just want to make sure you haven't forgotten. Okay.
Just once, I guess.
Yeah.
That's up until the due date to the loan?
No. It's after the loan has matured.
Even after the loan.
If the loan has matured, you can only, if you know he doesn't have the ability to pay. Now that's only if you know he can't pay.
So
if you know he can pay, and he just doesn't want to be bothered by having to liquidate a certain asset or something like that, so then you are allowed to tell him, listen, we got to figure out how you're going to pay this back. Do you want to sell one of your assets? And should we go to a base then if you feel that I'm being unfair?
So in that case, that's what I was about to say. In that case, if you, for some reason, understand that I can't pay you back, then basically you have to write the loan off.
Well, we're not saying to write it off. We're just saying that if you know that, listen, hopefully it's only temporary, but the guy's indreert. He just doesn't have the ability to pay. And, I don't want him to lose his house. I don't want him to lose his car. I want him to be able to feed his family. So there the Torah says, don't oppress him. If you know that he doesn't have the ability to pull the money together, don't make a point of reminding him so there you're in violation of the law.
You have a time duration for that before you take further steps or not?
No.
Just it's your call.
Is an email any less painful?
An email would also be a violation if you know he cannot pay. You do have a right to take him to Beis Din if he has an asset that you know that he could liquidate in order to pay back the loan. So like, let's say he has a summer home, like a cottage, or let's say he, he has plenty of stuff. He's got a baseball card collection or something. And you know he could sell it. He just doesn't want to part with some of his finer things. So then you are allowed to tell him, I think this is going to have to go to a Beis Din. In other words, be friendly about it, but you have a right to get your money back.
Or you don't pay somebody back and they write it off their taxes, they save the money from their taxes. And then a year later, you have the money you want to pay back. Is that a part of the calculation? The fact that they saved money on their taxes?
Well, how did they save money?
Because if you wrote the loan through your business, you write it off as a loss in your business and you can save on your taxes.
Well, I guess, the next year you'd have to put it up as a profit for your business then,
Yeah.
right? Is that right?
Yeah, legally, yeah.
Legally, yeah, but no one would do that.
Yeah.
The guy lends you from his business $5,000, and then he didn't get paid, and then he comes to you 3 years later, says, you know what? Here's the fine. I made money, but I know you saved 1,000 because you wrote off on your taxes. Here's $4,000.
No, you can't. No way, Jose.
It's double dipping on his side of the guy who,
The tax saving?
yeah, from the tax savings.
He did gain from that.
He gained from that.
No, that's not the borrower's cheshbon. The borrower can't say, I did you a favor by borrowing money from you. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, that's a real Gemara cup. Yeah. Okay. Ein adam pareya toch zmano matai amrinan. So what are the parameters of this law that a lender has a right to refuse early repayment? This also may be related to what you were saying, Moish, is that there's every reason why the lender doesn't want to get paid back early. Like, let's say he lent the money from his business, and for this calendar year, he wants to write it as a loss. Okay, so there could be any number of reasons why a lender would not want to get paid back prematurely. So he says, Halacha rovachat biyadenu shestam halva l'shloshim yom ve'ein rashayam alva l'tovo kodem lachein. We know that if a standard loan is 30 days, and the lender is not allowed to demand payment before that time. Mahadin kishomer halova shepara kodem shloshim yom ma'im ne'eman. Now, what happens if after 30 days, the lender comes and says, I'd like to collect the debt that you owe me. And the lova says, oh, I paid you 2 weeks after I borrowed the money. Is such a person believed if there's no proof? Or do we say that a person is not believed because there's an assumption that people don't pay back their debts early? So the answer is, Tshuva, hagam shechazaka ein adam pareya b'toch zmano, mikol makom hainu davka b'koveya zman. That's true only when a time was set explicitly in the loan docs. Aval bistam halva'a, or verbally when the loan was extended. Aval bistam halva'a, afal pi shezman shloshim yom, ne'eman halo v'lomar paraticha b'toch shloshim yom. However, if there was no time stipulated and it's just assumed that a loan is 30 days, because that's the standard amount, then a lova is believed if he says, I paid you back early. This, you have to say, we're talking about an oral loan. And it's a friendly loan so that there's no paper. And because if there's paper, the creditor who has the promissory note always has the upper hand. Because if you borrowed with a promissory note, you're not believed to say, I paid you back if the guy still has the promissory note, because generally speaking, the promissory note gets destroyed or returned to the borrower at the time of the repayment. So you have to say this is an oral loan. A guy would be believed if he says, I paid you. Now, but only when there's no date There was no date stipulated as to when you have to pay me back. Now, next, chiyuv lahalvos k'shechoshesh lo yachzir. This too we already saw. She'ela, misha choshesh lo yachzir haloives piron ha'halva. Haim gam ba'ofen hazeh yesh chiyuv lahalvoso. Do I have an obligation to lend someone money if I believe that he will not be able to pay me back? So we said that this is more in the realm of chesed. This is not in the realm of a loan anymore. True, even though the whole mitzvah is chesed, right? But this is more like tzedakah. So tshuva kishahamal v'makiris alova ubatuach she'oto adam lo yelo mimala achzir. So the answer is that when I know the guy, and I know there's no way he's going to pay me back. Like there is a certain person that I know who has every good intention of when he borrows money to pay it back. But I also know, I've dealt with this fellow long enough to know that he's not capable. He doesn't have the ability. And I'm sure you all know people that are like that. They don't mean to leave you in the lurch, but invariably they do. Oh, shiotzi salva shalo litzorach v'yovdena. Or you feel the person's going to be irresponsible with the money. Let's say he's got a gambling problem, right? That's what the example that we gave before. Ad shelo yimtza mima legavas ischava. So you know he's just going to blow the money. So in that situation, you're better off not lending him the money so that you avoid the whole prohibition of oppressing him when he doesn't have the ability to pay. And that's why the Torah uses the equivocal preposition, if you lend my people money. It doesn't say, even though Rashi says that the word im there means when, but the Torah uses lamaise, it uses an equivocal term. If you lend my people money. Why? Because sometimes it's not your obligation to lend him money, such as a person who asks you for a loan, but you know he's not going to pay it back. Mashkon o eravon kigon shek lebitachon o arivim v'rak az yesh lahalvoto. The only way that you have an obligation to lend such a person money is if he can provide you with security. And that's what typically gemachs do, either security or a guarantor. And that's what most gemachs do today, or free loan societies. They say, we're happy to lend you the money, but you got to put up some security. Either put up an item that you own for collateral, or get us a cosigner, as you have experience. Omnam imivakesh mimenu sikum katan yachol lahalva lo kishu ani midin tzedaka va'afim lo yifrenu yachol lenakod zot mechashbon hatzedaka shelo. However, if you see that the guy is asking you for a small amount, relatively small amount, he doesn't say how much that amount is. Every person has to assess that. If a guy says, I need $500 to tie me over until the end of the month, and you know he's not going to pay you back, you could take a look and say to yourself, listen, I give $500 a month anyway to tzedakah, so I'll lend him the money, and if he doesn't pay me back, I'll just write it off as my tzedakah for that month. Okay, so that's perfectly fine.
You have to tell the person that you've written it off, so now his obligation is.
You have no obligation to tell him that.
Even though you've taken it for your Meister money or your stock money, whatever.
Well, yeah, you have no obligation. You just have to return it to your Meister money if he ends up paying you back. The fact that you tithe religiously is between you and Hashem. It's none of his business, because like we learned before, not everyone tithes. And so that's the argument. That's the argument. I guess the only exception would be is if you know that the guy feels terrible. If the guy's walking around depressed every time he sees you and he's humiliated, then you probably have a mitzvah to go over to him and say, listen, it's okay, buddy. Don't worry. I just wrote it off to tzedakah. We're still friends. It's forgotten.
Whoever talks to me.
Yeah. They're knock on my door. So what,
Lose my
it
number.
doesn't talk about it hasn't mentioned the fact that if you are aiding somebody with gambling or some other habit by giving them money, you're actually. putting a stop
You're
on it.
you're an enabler. Yeah. Yeah.
And therefore.
That's also an argument. You know, I don't want to support your addiction. Yeah.
Sometimes a problem I see is when you're giving tzedakah, you're not sure what it's being used for.
Correct. Correct. But you can't assume that just because a guy regularly collects tzedakah, he's using it for cigarettes and prostitutes, you know. Just,
I would never put that.
all right, I'm just saying, you know, I mean, there have been cases, we unfortunately know of cases where that's been the case. But
Like I said, cigarettes are a kind of prostitute too.
No, not, it's not cigarettes, so you kind of know, okay, well, that money's definitely probably going to a pack of cigarettes, at least part of it. Prostitutes, that's a little bit.
You find out a bit about it.
yeah, okay. All right. Yesh biyado lahalvos ve'eno malve. Let's say you have the ability to lend money and you neglect to do so. So there's Shayla is like this. There's a mitzvah sasem in haTorah lahalvos la'aniyei achenu. So there is a positive commandment in the Torah to lend money to the poor within our community. Shenemar im kesef talves ami es he'ani imach. As it says, if you lend money to the poor person that is with you, that's again, he's misquoting the pasuk, which is unfortunate. It indicates that there's a certain lack in the sefer as far as the precision. Umanu mone hamitzvos harambam hasmag v'hachinuch le'echad mitaryag hamitzvot umitzvah zuchova v'lo rishus. And all of the Rishonim indicate that this is a mitzvahs aseh. It's one of the 613 commandments to lend your fellow Jew money. And people don't realize this. People think, well, you know, what's the big deal? It's not even on my radar to lend people money. As our sages say, and this is brought by Rashi, normally when the Torah says im, it means if. But here the rabbis say it means when, because there is an obligation with that one proviso that we mentioned just a moment ago, which is that if you know he's going to blow it, then there's no mitzvah. But generally speaking, there is a mitzvah. And we see the Torah uses the language of commandment later on in the pasuk when it says take a collateral from him and make sure that you provide him with all of his needs. V'yesh la'ayin, ma sheyesh biyado lahalvos ve'eno malva, ha'im over alav kagon kishadam nitzarech v'yesh biyado lahalvos ve'eno lahalvos. Is a person in violation of the Torah when he has the ability to lend someone money and someone asks him for a loan and he fails to do so? Have I now just committed an Isser deoraisa? So obviously there's going to be different circumstances, right? Tshuva, so the answer is Yesh mi she'omer shahanimna milahalvos la'ani over b'shnei lavin. Some say that if you neglect to lend money to a poor person, you violate two negative commandments. Shenamar hishomer lecha pen yihiyeh davar im levavacha v'liyah lemor karava shanas hasheva shanas hashemitah. The Torah says very clearly in Parshas Re'eh, be very careful lest there be something that is wayward in your heart and you will think to yourself, well, listen, the Shemitah year is coming and the loan will be wiped out and I don't want to lend the guy money. And your eye will be miserly against your poor brother and you won't lend him. The Hishomeru penhein lavin, and the Torah uses two languages of thou shalt not, Hishomer and pen. The imleit asher karva shanas hasheva huzarnu shelo nachto milabos miras davar hashmita kol shekain bizman shelo yafsid chova. And if the Torah is admonishing every single Jew not to think that way, just because you're concerned that Shemitah will wipe out the debt, then certainly when that's not a concern, a person is in violation of this law. So we've studied this halacha already, so that's why we're going through it like rapid fire. But the bottom line is that, there are going to be certain situations where I have money in the bank, it's just sitting there, maybe accruing a small amount of interest, but I do have the ability to lend it to people. So why shouldn't I lend it? Do I have an obligation to go and find people to lend? That I don't have. But when someone comes to me, or I know that there's an opportunity where a person would benefit, then I have a mitzvah to do it. Okay, we'll have to hold it here.
Or is it to loan to the poor?
It's specifically to the poor. However, we learned also that the poor is speaking in the vernacular, which means that if you know that there's someone wealthy who could benefit from a short-term loan, and you know that he can pay it back, he just needs to put a stash together so that he can do this business deal, then it's also part of